Okay.
Bruchem Aboim, Shem Hashem, Baruch Shechiyonu, V'Kivonu L'Osman Hazeh, L'Asher Atolo Yeshna, to return to Shiurim, to Stolo, B'Shvendish, Matam Torah. Shem Yikin Shir Torah, like welcome to all of them that came, and everyone joining in on the phone, for Kulu. Today we have discussed here once again, Oy V'Nacharoyis, Merecha, Steve of Jacob, especially to speak on the topic of Issa Medida, Shkila B'Shabbos Yom Tov, measuring weighing on Shabbos Yom Tov. Harav Mir.
First of all, as we just heard, Haid Lashem Ki Tov, Baruch Hashem, Zayich to come back. We could probably make a Shechiyanu. It's not possible that we lived weeks, terrifying weeks, and we saw B'chush Ki Heim Chayenu Baruch Yameinu. And I must mention, Irgun Shirei Torah did not stop learning for one day. Baruch Hashem, the Shurim continued. Whether it was we saw it over, people had it on the phones, they had it heard over the phones. And it's a wonderful chizuk to see that Torah is our life, and halavai we should continue to learn in gesund to hate. Today I had a beautiful sugya grad that started with two shals that people asked me, and I was not familiar with the sugya, I'll be honest with you. One, someone asked me before Sukkot, his wife makes a roast on Yom Tov, and she insists he wants to put a thermometer in to measure the temperature of the roast. I'm not a big cook, not even a small cook in fact, but it was very important for her to be able to measure the temperature of the roast. Are you allowed to measure on Yom Tov? In other words, the assumption is measuring is asa. On Shabbos, Yom Tov, since Eichel Nefesh is mutter, maybe it's mutter. Another question someone asked me the other week, there's a certain game, I'm not familiar with the game, Rummy Cub I think it's called, and you play the game, you have it's called a sand clock. You turn the clock over, so to speak, and there's a bunch of sand that starts to go down, and it measures the time, how long the game should take place. The kids are playing that game on Shabbos. Is that an Issa of Medida? You're measuring the sand in the time clock. Of course, there's negaya to medicine and temperature and blood pressure and baking on Yom Tov, weighing oneself. And how can we not mention, I guess, in Yad Diyayma, it used to be a question, you have to measure distance in shul to see if you're within Dalar Amis when you want to step back to the person behind you. Today, obviously, we have to measure as far as social distancing is concerned. You have to measure how far you are. Is that mutter on Shabbos or Yom Tov? And as we'll see, it's two big sugyas in Masechta Shabbos, in Masechta Beya. But one thing I will say, that Medida, as we'll call it, measuring, is not one of the Lamates Malachas. Both Rabbi Yonasan Shteif and the Chuvas in Kuf Chav Gimel and Ramesh and Chelik Aleph Kuf Chav Ches, both were asked about using a thermometer on Shabbos, and the Shayel assumed it's an Issa of Medida, a Malach of Medida. So both of them were very sensitive to the MS, especially in Halacha. There's, can't tolerate any inaccuracy, and they both said, wait a minute, you're making a mistake. There's no Malacha of Medida, it's not one of the Isurei Torah. Ramesh says the closest thing to Medida that's awesome in Torah is Mechatech, you're cutting by a measure. But both of them are clear, there's no Issa Daraisa of Medida. So what is the Issa? As we'll see, it's an Issa Darabanan. What's the source? It's the Mishnah in Shabbos, the very end, Kuf Nun Zayin Amar Aleph. The Mishnah says you're allowed to measure mitzvah material. Lamash, you're measuring a piece of cloth to see if it's Gimel al Gimel Agabe Tumah. You're allowed to measure the content of a mikvah. That's what the Mishnah says. So we see l'chayra two halachas from the Mishnah. Number one, Medida shel mitzvahs mutter, but it's also obvious, had it not been a mitzvah, it would be asa. Why? So let's learn the Gemara, and I'm going to get a head start. Daf Yomi will get a head start, because otherwise it's a pliadika Gemara. The last shtickle Gemara in Masechta Shabbos is the following strange story. Ula saw someone on Shabbos sitting and soaking in cold water in a barrel. Rashi says the barrel. Taisa says it was a ambatcha in a bath, and he was measuring the amount of water in the bath. So Ula asked him, "What are you doing?" Enachanam, you're allowed to measure l'tzarech mitzvah, but you're not doing a mitzvah. Sitting in a tub or a barrel on Shabbos measuring. What are you doing? So he said, "You're making a mistake. You're right. It's not a mitzvah. Misasek ba'alma ano. I'm a misasek." Rashi says, "Shaloi l'tzarech el yisuke ba'alma." You're right. I'm not doing a mitzvah. I am a misasek. So now we see three halachas from this sugya. Number one, medida shal mitzvah is mutter. Number two, medida that's not a mitzvah is asa. And misasek is mutter. So the obvious question is, what's going on here? Since when is misasek mutter? We know misasek in Hilchos Shabbos, you didn't intend to do anything. You picked up your hand to reach to get something, and you put on the light by mistake. That's misasek. But you can't do a misasek lechatchila. What does misasek ba'alma mean? So the Marsha says, you're right, it's not the regular misasek. It's the special medida misasek that's mutter, and that's why the Gemara says the lashon of misasek ba'alma. It's not a regular misasek. So now the whole thing is puzzling. What's going on here? Why is medida asa? If it is asa, since when does a mitzvah justify doing isurim? And also, what's misasek all about? So let's learn a Taisvis, and hopefully we'll have the aside of the sugya. Taisvis early in Shabbos, Kufcha Vav Amud Beis, Taisvis wonders, the Gemara is talking about a different concern about binyan, about pekak, adding a pekak to binyan, and even though it's makkah mitzvah, you can't do it. Fragt Taisvis, why can't you do b'makkah mitzvah to adding the pekak? You're allowed to measure b'makkah mitzvah. So Tais says the aside of today. The Issa Medid is not a real Issa Malacha, rather it's Uvda D'chayil. Therefore Chazal said B'makkah mitzvah is mutter. But Pekak, adding a Pekak, like a stopper, is similar to Binyan. You can't be Makel, the Issa Binyan B'makkah mitzvah. So Taisis is saying the Issa of Medida is Uvda D'chayil, weekday activity. And that's why B'makkah mitzvah is mutter. Now, we can understand why b'makkah mitzvah is mutter. Because the most important klal in Yiddishkeit is the ends don't justify the means. You can't do an issa and do a mitzvah at the same time. That's called mitzvah b'aveira. What's pshat over here? It's beautiful. It's not a malacha of medida, it's uvda d'chayil, it's weekday activity. If you're doing it b'makkah mitzvah, it's not weekday activity. It's not uvda d'chayil, it's a very chashuva act. So therefore, Zokt Taisviz, I think that's what Tais means to say, since the whole Issa is of the D'chayil, b'makkah mitzvah, it's no Issa. So not the Pshat, the mitzvah justifies the Issa. The mitzvah is Megala, that there's no of the D'chayil, and therefore it's mutter. And if you look at the Rav Shulchan Aruch in our Siman Shin Vav Yud Ches, also limdaid, because it's Ma'aseh Chayil v'zilzul Shabbos, but a mitzvah, Kiven shumoidei shiurei Torah einay nira k'ma'aseh chayil. It's masik midvash. The issa is of the chayil. B'makkah mitzvah, it's now no longer an issa at all. That's what it comes out from Tais and with the Rav. So not that the mitzvah justifies the issa. The mitzvah is megala. There's no issa in the first place. Now the big question is, okay, since it's an issa, why is misasek mutter? A person can't do a malacha on Shabbos and say misasek. So here I'll tell you a Matziyah Gedoyla, the Kilas Yainkiv in the Chadoshim, Siman Nun Zayin Sif Cotton Gimel. There's a hadron that he said on Masechta Shabbos, the year Taf Reish Pei Dalet, close to 100 years ago. It's 11 pages. And he discussed his mamish, the hadron on the very end of Masechta Shabbos. So if you want to give a hadron by the Siyam on Daf Yomi, listen to a beautiful Yisai. He has a, mamish talks about our sugya. He says you can't give tzedakah on Shabbos and say I'm doing a mitzvah. So what's the heta of mitzvah regarding medida? So he really says that what we said earlier, the same Yisoid, that the Issa of Medida is Memtzoi Cheftzecha. You're busy with Ovda D'Chayil, you're busy with your own activities on Shabbos. If it's a mitzvah, it's not Ovda D'Chayil, like we said from Taisis. But then he adds the Hezba and Misasek. Because again, the Kasha is so obvious. If a person, Chas Shalom, is bored on Shabbos, no one should be bored on Shabbos, he is never bored, but let's say he's bored on Shabbos. So he decides to build just to keep busy. About that's an Issa. You might call it Malachash and Tzvicha L'Gufa because you don't need the byproduct, but it's definitely Asa Midrabanan. So Frank the Stipler, so why is Misasek for Medida Mutta? True, you don't need the end result, but there's still an Issa. So Zok the Stipler, beautiful. If the Issa is of the D'Chayil, it's a form of Mimtzoi Cheftzecha. You're weighing or you're measuring to be able to sell your fruits, you have to weigh the fruit. The Issa is because Mimtzoi Cheftzecha. If you're doing it for no reason, it's not Mimtzoi Cheftzecha. He gives an example. You're not allowed to talk about prices on Shabbos. But let's say it's not Negeya to you. You already bought your suit. You're curious, hey, how much you pay for your suit? That's Mutta. Why is it Mutta? Beautiful. Because it's not Mimtzei Cheftzecha. That's the Yisoid of Misasek. Misasek is Taka Asa, B'chal HaTarakul, Midrabanan. But by Medida, if you're not getting anywhere because you don't need this end result, it's no Issa in the first place. And I want to tell you, the Maharsha Taka points out, Misasek Ba'alma, it's a different type of Misasek. Now I'm going to give you one more example of the Misasek, and then we'll see how much we could use that example. The Torah in our Siman Reish Vav quotes Raviyah, that's a certain type of lachash. A lachash is something like a skula of refuah. You take a azor, like a gartel or a belt, and you measure it gimel amois, gimel pamim, and you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. So the Raviyah says, wait a minute. Alts refuah, it's not really refuah, there's no issa. But why isn't it asa alts medida? You're measuring the azor, the person, gimel, 3 times. So he says the ik is the refuah, and the measuring is misasek ba'alma. So what do we see from this? The yisoid of misasek is if you're measuring to know the weight of something, that's asa. That's mimtzei cheftzecha. If you're measuring just for a different purpose, that's no issa. There's an unbelievable Avnei Nezer in the Tshuva Siman Tov Gimel. Avnei Nezer discusses halacha mufareshes in Shulchan Aruch, which is based on Rishonim, that even though klishim alachte leheta, you're allowed to move michama letzeil, but you can't move a shalei letzayich klal, as they state in Shulchan Aruch. So the Avnei Nezer says, I'm not arguing on the Shulchan Aruch or Rishonim, but people, you see them touching lachte leheta for no reason. You ever go to a simcha, and there's a speaker that's speaking along, people start playing with the silverware, and depending how long he speaks, either they start playing, or they start chewing it, or cracking it. Why is that not Shalei L'Tzarech Klal? So you could say, well, to let out your frustrations, to vent your nervin, maybe it's a tzarech. But he says, if you see regarding Medida, that Misasek Shalei L'Tzarech Klal is Mutta, why can't the same apply regarding Muktzah? So he says, I'm not going to argue on the Rishonim, but at least I could be Melamed Chus. We see from Medida, Shaloi L'Tzarech Klal is no Issa. So how would God be Muktzah that it's a Malachta Leheta? Why is it Mochama? Okay. So here we have the following Yisoidis. Medida is Asal of the D'Chayil. But Makei Mitzvah, it's not an Issa in the first place. And Misasek is not the Ma'isa Medida because you're not figuring out of the D'Chayil. Before you apply this more Lamaisa, I must tell you the Sugi and Beya. It's actually 2 Mishnayos, Daf Chav Ches and Chav Tes. So you notice the Medida is 3 Mishnayos in Shas, not Heintige Chumris, it's 3 Mishnayos. But the Mishnah in Beya Chav Ches says you're not allowed to use a scale, Kol Ikar. So what does Kol Ikar mean? To put food even to protect it from mice, the Shmar Me'achborim. A scale on Shabbos is off limits. I wonder, Taka, incidentally, you have a better terrace than I'll say, I'd love to hear it. You're not allowed to put meat on a scale even to protect it from mice. Why don't we say it's muta, it's misasek? Misasek is muta by Shabbos. Why isn't it misasek? Putting on to protect from mice. So I just found yesterday the Bi'alach and Taf Kuf Siv Beis. He says that scales is more chamor. Now look, I'll be this question. He says scale is more chamor when you put something on meat on the scale because it sits there for a long time, and it's more closely is because of the concern of nira that you're measuring. So it could be the problem with a scale, putting meat on the scale, is it's more similar more to the chashash of nira kemekach umemka. So could be it's the fact that it's there for a long time, that's why it's us. But the Gemara really builds on this. You're not allowed to measure even mana keneged mana. Let's say on Shabbos, you're not going to use a scale. So you put potatoes on this end, and you put bananas on this end, and you figure out the weight. That's also us. In fact, the Mishnah Berurah and Sifkat and Yud Gimel, I'm talking about Taf Kuf, Sifkat and Yud Gimel, says an expert that could weigh by picking up an item is also asa. Why? Medida on Yom Tov is asa. But remember, Yom Tov Eichel Nefesh is mutter, but Medida is more chama. Medida is asa. The next Mishnah Daf Chavtes about measuring foods. I'll give you a good example, as we'll soon see. You're in a bungalow colony and you need food, you need fruit. So the storekeeper says, you know what, go into the store, take what you want. Just measure it first. I have a mechanical scale, weigh it. You'll pay after Shabbos. He won't say that, but just take care, make sure that you could take what you want, but see how much you're taking. So the Mishnah says you're now allowed to either measure or weigh on Yom Tov. In fact, the Mishnah Gemara, and this is in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Chavdalet Beis, you can't even measure sa'orim to feed your animals, because measuring and weighing on Yom Tov is awesome. What to me is the biggest chiddush in Taf Kuvav Sif Aleph. You're not allowed to measure flour on Yom Tov. Now, don't forget, people used to bake on Yom Tov. Today it's not done typically, but you're allowed to bake on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to measure a cup of flour on Yom Tov, als medida. Toisvis Daf Chavtes in Beya says so weit that if a person's baking, forget about measuring to know ingredients. I have to take off challah. I have to measure the flour, how much challah is needed. So Toisvis, you're not allowed to measure flour on Yom Tov. Your kavanah is take off challah, but so Toisvis, when they had to take off a specific amount, aleph, michav dalid, and give it to the kohen, you have to be exact. Today, anyway, we take a kazayis, a kol shum yikadin is enough. So just do it and just approximate. In other words, even if it's a mitzvah, but if it can be avoided, don't do it. And that's the psak in Shulchan Aruch. In other words, even the makam mitzvah that's mutter is only when it's absolutely necessary. This is obviously a little bit about Yom Tov. Even Yom Tov is awesome. But the question is, why tak on Yom Tov is it awesome? You're allowed to bake, you're allowed to cook, you're allowed to carry, you're allowed to make boira. Why can't you measure? So Pashit will say, of the Dechayel. Of the Dechayel is awesome on Yom Tov. But if you look at Rashi twice, the Maschal V'Asa, the Maschal Hacha, Rashi adds another factor. And that is, measuring and weighing is nira k'mekach u'memka. Because don't forget, Mekach Memka always was, even today it's pre-measured and pre-weighed, but it's always based on weight, volume, weight, you measure things. Measuring and weighing is one big Mekach Memka. And that's Takawai it's us. So now we see, besides the Issa of Uvda Dechayel and measuring or weighing, it's also Mekach Memka. And it's noteworthy, the Rambam in Hilchas Yom Tov, Perik Dal, and Halacha Yotes, says many things Chazal Asur al Tzmekach Umemka, and he gives a few examples. In Halacha Chaf he says you're not allowed to weigh on Yom Tiv. Obviously weighing is Asa al Tzmekach Umemka. So we have the following, and Tak in Hilchas Yom Tiv we'll find it in Taf Nun Vav, Taf Kuf, Taf Kuf Vav, Taf Kuf Yud Zayin, Hilchas Shabbos Shin Vav, Shin Chav Gimel, Shin Chav Dalid. Throughout Hilchas Shabbos and Yom Tiv, measuring and weighing is Asa, either out of the Dechayel or out Tzmekach Umemka. So now that we have enough information, let's apply it l'maisa. So first, like I mentioned earlier, even if in a situation you're allowed to take food on Shabbos or Yom Tov from a store, he trusts you, you're allowed to take food, don't talk about paying and don't measure. Measure or weighing how much you're taking is mamish our issa of the dechayel. In fact, if the storekeeper, let's say in the bankang, says, you know what, I'll go in for you. I know how to take care of things. And he picks up a bag of bananas. This is 2 pounds, whatever. That's mamish a din gemara that it's awesome. Because a mumcha, even by picking up, is awesome. Lav dafka, I should mention, lav dafka, measuring with a tape measure. Measuring by foot is also awesome. Listen to this. In Shin Tzadik Zayin, that's the Shulchan Aruch about Hilchos Tchum Shabbos, the Mechaber said, let's say a person didn't measure the Tchum Shabbos before Shabbos. So the Mechaber is allowed to take 2,000 steps, actually 2,070 steps, on Shabbos and then stop. Because the average step is a foot, is an amma. So I had to take 2,000 steps, because the average foot is an amma. Half an amma of the foot, and a person's step is a half an amma. So Zok the Mishnah Berurah, you've got me. Wait a second. It's only mutter if you're going for a dvar mitzvah. Because if not, how are you allowed to measure on Shabbos? You're measuring with your feet, that's also measuring. So you see from the Mishnah Berurah that even measuring by foot, you're not using a tape measure, is awesome. Listen to a fascinating shayla. Someone asked Shlomo Zalman if you're allowed to measure by counting tiles. Now again, this is mamash negeya in this time of the year. The average tile is a foot. That's the metzias. So let's say you want to know the person behind you, is he within my 6 feet of the social distancing? So no problem. You look down and you count 6 tiles. Is that considered medida? It used to be negeya. You measure dollar amis in the shul. You want to back up, outside, front. But simple. The standard tile is 1 foot. So Shlomo Zalman in Shmir Shabbos Chaf Tes Tzad Gimel, he says, this doesn't make sense. You're not allowed to measure. But counting tiles is not a ma'isa measuring. But then he reconsidered, all the same place. And he says, it's not bara that it's mutter. Because if you ended up measuring accurately the distance, why is it mutter? And the emes is, maybe a raya is by walking. You're not allowed to walk because you're measuring. So why is counting tiles different? But the emes is, there is a difference. Because when you're walking, you do a ma'isa medida with your feet. Here, you're scanning with your eyes, you're counting tiles. So I saw the Shulchan Shloim, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Sefer, on Hilchos Shabbos, also says this svar. He says, when you count with your steps, you're doing a ma'isa medida. But stop counting tiles mentally, what's the yissa? I saw Taka Rav Karp in Hilchos Shabbos, B'Shabbos Chaldal Amud Kuf Yud. He's mad to counting tiles. We never find an issa medida, you don't do a ma'isa medida. But the emes, I don't understand that, because l'ma'isa you're counting tiles. So Shlomo Zalman is more noita lahachmir. But if you look at the Shmir Shabbos, if it's b'mokei mitzvah, then even if it's medida, it's mutter. So taka for dalar amas at tefillah or for social distancing, if it's a mokei mitzvah, it would be mutter. A person weighing himself, his weight on Shabbos or Yom Tov, l'chayr is a regular case of medida. You're measuring your weight. Now, if it's mokei mitzvah, of course you could be mekel, but what's the mitzvah? People think getting on the scale and weighing yourself it makes you lose weight. Maybe it's a little exercise, climbing up and down, but that's not a mitzvah. So basically, weighing oneself would be asa on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Measuring height, take a tape measure, how tall are you, is also, that's the medida. Now, I once saw, Mama, was very interesting, a proud Baba wanted to know, who's growing? So on Shabbos told, no, Yossi, stand back to back with Chaim, let me see how tall you are. Is that medida? So obviously it's not medida, because you don't know how tall each child is. You just know one thing, that Chaim is a yamaka taller than his brother Yossi. Because stood back to back, that's all you know. But you don't know how tall he is, you didn't measure it. Also, we'll soon see that approximating is not medida, so that's not a form of medida. What interesting, which might be a form of medida, you take a teaspoon of coffee. Is that medida? A teaspoon of sugar, you ladle out soup, a scoop. So I think the easiest these shilas is a ladle and a scoop is not a ma'isa medida. It's a convenient way of serving. But no one knows how much a ladle is, and you're not trying to measure exactly a ladle or a scoop. So it's certainly a form of misasek, if not better than that. It's just not a ma'isa medida. What I have a little of a problem is a person is makbid, not more than a teaspoon of sugar. So why isn't the spoon the kli medida? So the Shmir Shabbos is Shin Chav Gimel, the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Chav Gimel, the Ramon Asif Aleph, not talking about a teaspoon, but he says a klal. Even when there is a ma'isa medida, if you purposely make it imprecise, you make it inaccurate, there's no issa medida. The medida is you do it exactly. So I would imagine if a person takes a teaspoon or a tablespoon, whatever it is, and he doesn't do it perfectly, it will be mutter based on this Ramah. But I'm not sure if someone is makbid not more than a teaspoon of sugar, so why is that a ma'isa medida? So I saw the Shmir Shabbos in Yud Aleph Sif Lamed. He says, taka using a spoon, Yamaid Aisai v'lo yimdaid. Don't do it exactly. So I think it's taka true. If someone is using a spoon and he's very medayik, not a granule of sugar more than a teaspoon, that would be the issa of medida. I saw in the Sefer Yom Tov Kilchasa, he says, a spoon is not a kli medida. That's hard to understand because feet are also not a kli medida. If you end up making a ma'is medida, why shouldn't that be us? What I still remember today, it's rare to find this, but they used to make a manual slicer. You could slice salami, cheese, bread. You basically, with your hand, you move the food back and forth, and you slice to a certain size. So the Shmir Shabbos in Vav Yud Aleph says there's no problem of slicing on Shabbos. There's no issa mechatech v'yochel, but he doesn't speak about why is there no issa of medida. So obviously, if you just slice it and you're not so makbid an exact size, I think there are different settings, but you're not so makbid on the exact size. So you want to slice a thin slice, but you're not makbid this thin or that thin. So that might be a form of misasek, which is mut. I'll tell you a fascinating sugya, because it's mamash our sugya. Let's say a person is cooking or baking on Yom Tov, and they want to measure ingredients. No way near Mekach Memka. Is it mutter to measure ingredients on Yom Tov for Oichel Nefesh on Yom Tov? So the plea is the Rashba in Beyad Af Chav Ches says the following: we only find Medida in a Mekach Memka context, but someone in their own home, there's no Issa Medida. And he quotes Yerushalmi that says the same Yesod. Medida for Oichel Nefesh on Yom Tov, that's not for business, is mutter. Now this is a big chiddush, because we learned, one of the Gemaras that we learned in Beya was measuring flour, and Tais says even for taking off chal is awesome. Also we learned the end of Masechta Shabbos, measuring a material, measuring a mikvah. So the Rashba himself says this, Miyu b'Gemara l'kamon, is mashma that even kamach is awesome. So you look at the Rashba, and the Rashba comes out l'chayra lahachmer. Yet the Torah in our Sim and Taf Kuf, he quotes the Rashba that it's mutter. He says it can't be, because the case of kamach. So what's going on here? The Rashba himself asked that kasha. So if you look at the older print of the Rashba and the Bialacha and Sim and Taf Kuf, they both say a very important historical fact, that the Rishonim didn't have the Sifrei HaRishonim. The Torah did not see the entire Rashba inside. So he saw part of the Rashba, or he saw quoted part of the Rashba, and he says the Rashba can't be. But Zakti Bi'alacha, there's no doubt about it, that even measuring on Yom Tov, Oichel Nefesh, is awesome. The only heta would be if you do it imprecisely. So Lamaisa, we will say, if a woman wants to bake on Yom Tov or cook, you should not measure with a precise measuring cup. You could use an imprecise, be'erech, oimed, or take a cup and not be exact. Then it's mutter, because it's not a violation of this issa. But what we do see, based on a Gemara Beya Chavtes, and listen good, because Negeya, is a person that's cooking or baking, and they need spices, you're allowed to measure Kadesh Le'akdiach Tavshiloi. If it's just to make sure it's perfect, so you live without perfection, don't measure. But if it's a question of ruining the food, Zakti Gemara, that there is a heta to measure on Yom Tov. Why? Obviously, if you have burned food on Yom Tov, there's no Einik Yom Tov. But again, what's the pshat? Because you want to eat a food, you're allowed to do an issa? Teretz chas v'shalom. You can't do an issa for a mitzvah. But since the issa is of the dechayil or mekach umemka, b'makay mitzvah, Not the pshat, the mitzvah is matter the issa, but mokem mitzvah, it's not over the chol, there's no issa. Just like the Rav Shulchan Aruch said it. And the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch quote this lahalach in the end of Tov Kuv Dalet. If it's a question of burning, the food getting burnt, it would be mutter. Of course, the Mishnah Berurah says there's another precondition. If this person generally is not makbid to measure, so Shabbos Yom Tov you're doing it. But if, again, it might burn, and you always are careful to measure, you're allowed to measure on Yom Tov. Someone had a question about making salad. Now listen to this is challenging. Making a salad on Shabbos. Till now we're talking about Yom Tov, now we're going to Shabbos. In other words, you can't cook and bake on Shabbos, but he wants to make a salad, a fancy salad. So he wants to measure the ingredients on Shabbos. Till now we said Medida, L'tzarech, Yoichel Nefesh, on Yom Tov is mutter. Now the question is on Shabbos. So the Chayr will say Zil Basa Taima. If the is of the Chayil, and the Heta is for food, mitzvah, so why is it only Yom Tov? What in Shabbos? Und azoi steht in Shmir Shabbos, Chav Tes, Mem Gimel, that Lamaisa, if Medida, otherwise the food will get ruined, is mutter on Yom Tov, hu adin on Shabbos. Comes again the Sefer Megillah Sefer, Simon Pei Beis, and he asks the Chayil a very strong question. If there's an issa of the Chayil, then the only heta is Oichel Nefesh, like we saw in the Gemara. That's why I'm in Sech the Beis talking about Yom Tov. You're allowed to measure for Oichel Nefesh. Shabbos no heta of Oichel Nefesh. So why do you say it's mutter, even though it gets ruined? There's no heta of Oichel Nefesh on Shabbos. That's the kasha of the Megillah Sefer. So he's assuming to be matter, you have to have a heta of Oichel Nefesh, which is only on Yom Tov. But I think the Shmir Shabbos Kochas is right. The heta is not because the Oichel Nefesh is doicha the issa. If you're doing it l'tzoyrech Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's not over the Chayil. So once not over the Chayil, who cares Shabbos or Yom Tov? So that's why what I would think to say is that taka measuring, if it's needed for Oichel Nefesh on Shabbos, even though there's no heta of Oichel Nefesh on Shabbos, but if it's l'tzoyrech Oinik Shabbos, it's no issa. Not that the mitzvah is matter the issa, there's no issa whatsoever. What's probably the most important heta is based on our Mishnah, which is expanded by the Rishonim. The Mishnah, as we said earlier, says you're allowed to make Medida Shel Mitzvah. The Maram Rutenberg in the Fus Prague, Simon Tov Kuf Yud Beis, says that to make a lechisha, any type of refuah on measuring for refuah is mutter. The Shulchan Aruch in Shin Vav, Siv Zayin, expands this. Medida Shel Mitzvah, Lamashal, measuring the mikvah, or measuring the azor, that special lachash, that refuadik lachash, is all mutter. The Tilal David in Shin Lamed Ches Sif Katan Vav adds, very importantly, this is nav dafka a chayla she'ein by sakana is allowed to make medida. This is even if it's just a mitztayer, which is not a heta to take refuah. But once there's a need, that becomes a makkah mitzvah. Lav dafka chayla she'ein by sakana. The mere fact that he's mitztayer, he's allowed to measure as long as, of course, there's no other issa involved. Now, to give you an example, a perfect example, a question that we would find very challenging, and that is using a thermometer to take one's temperature on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So you think about it, a thermometer is a perfect example of medida. It measures very accurately a person's temperature. But then again, this goes into the heta of mitzvah, refuah. And therefore you have this heta of refuah. What's even a bigger chiddush, but it's pashit, a mechanical blood pressure. Now, the truth is, most people, if they have it at home, they have an electronic blood pressure. That, of course, is asa. I'm talking about what Atzal and doctors use, which is more precise, the manual, the mechanical blood pressure. So even though that's accurate, of course it's more accurate, but there's no problem on Shabbos or Yom Tov, because that's no more than a medida shel mitzvah, the tzarech refuah. Measuring medicine to give a chayla, even if you do it precisely, is mutter b'makeh mitzvah. Today, children's medicine, the drugstore gives you a very convenient measuring cup that you drink from it. I can't describe, but it's a long cup that measures exactly, and the child drinks from it. those are all medida, real medida, but medida shal mitzvah is mutter. Tricky question. Can I weigh ingredients on Yom Tov? Till now we spoke about medida and a little bit weighing. Now we're going to talk about medida shal mitzvah, using a scale to weigh it. Again, of course I'm talking about a mechanical scale, not a electronic scale. So you're wondering, if it's medida shal mitzvah's mutter on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so why shouldn't shkila, weighing on Shabbos or Yom Tov, be mutter with a scale? What's the difference? In other words, measuring is a different form of measuring than weighing, but they're both measuring. What's the difference, weighing or measuring? So, pashtis, zil basatayma. Weighing is a form of measuring. If it's mutter maka mitzvah, what's the difference if you're using a scale? And the Pesach Hatvir, one of the Svarish Poskim in Shin Vav, Sif Tez Vav, Taka says that. His example is you're weighing the matzah on Pesach to make sure you have the right amount for the kazayas. So he says, even though you're using a scale, and it's a real medida, but it's mutter al medida shal mitzvah. Now I must mention, this is only for Svardim, because us Ashkenazim, shiurim go with volume, size, not weight. So why do you have to weigh the matzah? Some Svarish Poskim use shiurim based on weight, so therefore he has to weigh it. But anyhow, he says weighing matzah, mora, we'll soon see wine, for the shiurim on Pesach is mutter at medida shal mitzvah. The Shmir Shabbos in Chavtes Kuf Gimel quotes up Shlomo Zalman that if it's mitzvah's mutter, what's the difference if you're using a tape measure, medida, or shkila with a weight, with a scale? However, it's a big chiddush, because when you learn the sugya, the Magen Avraham in Tov Kuf Sif Kat and Dalid says even though there's a heta in Ramah of weighing imprecisely, if you weigh something and it's not perfect, that's only by medida. But weighing imprecisely is also. The Ramah's talking that you're allowed to make medida that's not accurate. But weighing, even inaccurately, is also. Why? Because a scale is more nira kimoideid than medida. In other words, the Magen Avraham already made this chiluk that shkila, weighing, is more chama than measuring. And Taka in the Shmir Shabbos, he adds, in Rav Shlomo Zalman's words, but Lamaisa, look at the Magen Avraham. And Taka the Kaf HaChaim in Shin Vav Sif Katan Samach Gimel quotes this Pesach Advir, and he says, Libi mahasseis b'zeh mikama taimim. So I must tell you, and Taka, I saw the Kinyan Torah in Chelekei Simon Chav Beis, he writes the following. He says, a younger man did a wonderful idea, and he made a specially designed shiurim cup. A cup that you use for, it's very interesting how he describes it. He says, this much wine is of Rav Chaim's share, Rav Chaim Noah's share. And this is the Chazon Ish, this is that share. And you have big cups, you can have all the shiurim. Now, we remember many years ago, someone made a very practical Seder guide. It was a laminated piece of paper with a box. This big box is the matzah, and this is the maror, and this is the afikoimin, all different shiurim. So someone asked the King Torah, is that mutter? So he says, medida shal mitzvah is mutter. But he has an interesting point, and he wants to say the fact that you're using a weight system, that's more chama, because weighing we see is more chama than measuring. But what's interesting to me was Rabbi Shlomo Zalman seems to be mekel. Rabbi Yashiv in the Sefer Shabbos b'Shabbos Amad Kuvav Taka says weighing is asa even b'makom mitzvah. The Orlatzin, Rabbi Tzin Abashol and Chafhei Beis seems to be matir weighing even on Shabbos as long as it's makom mitzvah. So we could say weighing b'makom mitzvah is a machlokes haposkim, but measuring on Shabbos or Yom Tov b'makom mitzvah would be mutter. Another example of weighing on Yom Tov or Shabbos is le'olechem, a chayla that must eat on Yom Kippur. So if it's pikuach nefesh, he has to eat whatever he needs. But typically, we give up a chayla pachais, less than the shear, and you space it out a few minutes in between. The question is, if a chayla, his condition deteriorated, he must eat right now, but he can eat less than the shearim. Can you measure the food to make sure it's less than the shear? So Re'ez Apel, this is already a chinuch in Shin Yud Gimel, the Rishon. The chinuch says, you have to be careful because you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. A chayil is allowed to, and you're allowed to measure lishkol u'lishayer on Yom Kippur, even though measuring and weighing is awesome. But it's better to be over on medida than be over on eating unnecessarily on Yom Kippur. Now it's interesting, he's avad mekel to measure food. But why is he so apologetic? Why is he saying it's better do this than that? I thought medida makom mitzvah is mutter. So the teretz that I found, I think it's true, is if you could do a lechatchila before Yom Tiv, why do it on Yom Tiv? The Mishnah and Tov Reish Yud Ches Yivkot Chav Aleph, the Kaf Chaim twice, Yivkot Lamed Zayin and Yivkot Mem say you're allowed to take away food or measure food to know what to eat on Yom Kippur, but do it before Yom Tiv. So maybe the chinuch is saying if you didn't do it, so you're allowed to do it, but it's not so pashut. If you could avoid doing it and do it before Yom Tiv, you're mechuyev. And taka the minig is Rabbanim will tell a person before Yom Tiv, measure the amount you're allowed to eat and avoid sveikas. But if it wasn't done, or a chayla has a sudden need, avad you're allowed to measure or weigh food on Yom Tov. I guess here we have to say it's better than eating chas shalom shalei l'tzayrich, and therefore it's mutter. Using that Seder guide or that special cup to measure food on Yom Tov, as we said, Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Yashiv are all mekel by measuring because the medida shel mitzvah. What's interesting, the Kinyan Torah, and that truth that I mentioned, he has another chiddush, and he says you're measuring the wine and you're not using that cup to make kiddushin. You're measuring the wine in this measuring cup and then you're putting in a different kais. That's not medida shel mitzvah. If you measure the water of the mikvah, that's medida shel mitzvah. But measuring in the measuring cup and then putting it into your kais, where's the medida shel mitzvah? Which is a pella. What does that mean? I'm measuring this wine, I'm using this wine. So Lezachisi Lahavin, I saw the Hilchai Shabbos, B'Shabbos Amud Kovav, he says, I saw in a safe, he doesn't quote which one, I think it means this Kinyan Torah, that makes the chilek, is what's the difference? As long as it's being done to facilitate a mitzvah. B'chlal, you should know, with infant care or baby care, there's a lot of measuring, and it's all mut across the board, because don't forget, Stam Tzarchei Katan, K'chayla She'ein Bei Sakana, and it will be considered medida shel mitzvah. Let me share with you an absolutely fascinating shayla, and shimu sechin afshechem. I'll start with a very tmimistic shayla. Let's say a person has a thermometer on his table. Baruch Hashem, everybody's healthy, he does not need it. There's no measuring needed. The question is, if he has a thermometer on the table, he's afraid it's going to break. Can he pick up the thermometer on Shabbos and put it away? In other words, if a thermometer is muktzah, there's no heter to move it micham or to protect it. Maybe a thermometer is not muktzah, and you could even move it to protect the thermometer. In other words, it's pashut, as we said earlier. If you need to take someone's temperature, you're allowed to, it's a makom mitzvah. So even if it's muktzah, it's a klish malach l'issa. I'm talking about, is a thermometer muktzah if there's no need l'tzarech mitzvah? Is a malach l'het or malach l'issa? So you're probably wondering, what's the shayla? This is real medida. You want to say it's mutter makom mitzvah, fine, but it's still a malach l'issa. So I'll tell you what I saw from two gedolei hapaiskim, and it's quite convincing. The issa of medida is something that is used in mekech umemka context. Lamashal, tape measures, a tailor, or scales across the board. All medida that's used in mekech umemka is awesome. No one ever used a thermometer in mekech umemka. Zok Rav Moshe Chelik Alsem and Kuf Chav Ches. He says maybe the whole thermometer is not an issa medida. He writes a very mild lashon. She'ein in klal medida. Maybe it's only a chumrah ba'alma. There's a mile to be machemit, but maybe you can make makel by a thermometer across the board. What he's saying is unbelievable. If you take a tape measure and you measure the shul to know if there's social distancing, so that's a ma'isa medida, and the tape measure and measuring the floor is always used in business. Someone does your carpet, he measures the floor. So measuring is always used in mekech umemka. Weighing is always used in mekech umemka. A thermometer is only used to take someone's temperature. There's no shaychus to mekech umemka. So, like this understanding, a thermometer is Klisha Malachtai Leheta. And he doesn't say that lashon, but if you're looking at Shlomo Zalman's first sefer Ma'orei Eish, it's Amid Tzadik Zayin in the new print. He says, I don't see any issa in a thermometer at all. Why? And he says this yesod, because, and he puts it very bluntly, a thermometer is not of the chayil, it's of the chayili. It's used for chaylim, but it's never used to measure people. Therefore, he says, it would come out, and this he doesn't say here, but I saw in the Shulchan Shloima, his Sefer Shloima, and Shmir Shabbos, Perik Mem or Gimel, that a thermometer would be a Klisha Malachti Leheta. It has no shaykhis to Ovda Dechayah. Now let me give this a little more of a geschmack. If a person measures barley to feed his animal, which is a pasuk in the Torah, you have to feed your animals, it's also on Shabbos Yom Tov. It's the first Shemar and Beya. Why? Because the act of measuring barley is a Maisa of Medita. I am doing with my animal, big deal. But that's measuring. But taking a thermometer is never used in business. So Shlomo Zalman and Moshe, a little more parva, but both seem to say thermometer is not of the Dechayah, and therefore it's not asa. However, I saw Rabbi Yonason Steif has a tshuva about thermometers, the Minchas Yitzchak, Chelkas Yankiv, all are matir a thermometer because it's Malka Mitzvah. Obviously they held it's a Klisha Malachti L'Issa. The only act is Malka Mitzvah. Where are they coming from? I think the Pshat is Pashut. Chazal asked measuring. Is a thermometer a way of measuring? Absolutely. Don't look at this versus that. Measuring on Shabbos and Yom Tov is awesome. A thermometer is a bona fide measuring, a very precise measurement, and that's why they hold it's asa. It's a Klisha Malachti L'Issa. The only heta is b'malkei mitzvah. What will be the nafkamina if we're allowed to take temperature? I'll tell you two simple nafkaminas. Number one, you want to know what's the temperature outside. So you take a thermometer and go out on the porch, and you stand on the porch, and you take the temperature outside. If it's not Malka Mitzvah, like all those paiskim, it's awesome. Like Shlomo Zalman, it's mutter. And number two is a thermometer. Are you allowed to move it michama l'tzeil to protect it? Like the Shlomo Zalman, yes. Like the other paiskim, there's no heta, only l'tzeil gufa umekaymai. Oh, here, and this was the prize of my investment of time. Now let's talk about a shayla I didn't find in any of the paiskim, but I think it's very pashut. A woman wants to make a roast on Yom Tov, and they want to measure the temperature of the roast. And by them, it's gate and leaven, it's mamish, they can't roast without it. Is it mutter on Yom Tov to measure the roast? So I think there are two svaras to make a lechatchila. Number one, we said earlier, even measuring ingredients, if they're very makbid, it's mutter, it might burn. If the woman feels without measuring, it might burn. You have the heta are based on the Gemara in Taf Kuv Dalid, or Shulchan Aruch says, if you're makbid to be moeded, you're allowed to be moeded as long as you're not shaykel. No, this is moeded. And number two, like Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, there's no shaykel in the first place, because a thermometer was never asa als of the dechayel. Now, even though we saw many places don't go with that, but if this woman always measure the temperature of the roast, and it might get burnt, we have the heta, taf kuv dalet at the end. Blood pressure, now we have another svara to be makel. Besides the makayim refuah, blood, no one uses blood pressure in business. I mean, maybe after they have a bad deal, they take the blood pressure, but that's not a business activity. What I was thinking, and I found, Shlomo Zalman has this ha'ara. Maybe even weighing yourself on a home scale, a mechanical home scale, is also mutter. Because a scale that weighs people is not used in business. I mean, cannonballs maybe do, but not by people. And I saw Rabbi Zalman and the Shulchan Shloima suggest this. But the emes is he's not so convinced, and I understand why. Because a scale is used in business. Rather, this type of scale is not, but every business has a scale. A thermometer is fundamentally different. A thermometer is never used in business. That's why he's makel. But to say a scale is mutter, this scale or that scale. So I think the Veltak is machmu with scales, unless it's Malka Mitzvah. But basically, the yisoid is, it has to be over the chayil. Now, please help me, because this is a shayla that I have, and I think I have the emes. And the question that someone asked me was a sand timer, sand clock. Let me refresh your memory. It's something about probably this high, has X amount of sand, and you play a game, you turn it over, and the sand runs down, and that's the amount of time you have to play the game. I'm not familiar what game, it's called Rummy Cup, I don't know how the game even works, but basically it's the amount of time that you could do whatever you have to do. This is what someone asked. So, believe it or not, this is mamish our sugi in the most incredible way. Because what you're doing really is you're measuring time. How much time you have to do whatever you have to do. But wait a second, if measuring time is also, you might wonder, so how could I have a watch or a clock? It's also measuring time. So that's not so weit from the emes. Listen to a Maril, the Chuvas Maril Siman Reish, quoted by the Shulchan Aruch in the end of Shin Ches Sif Nun Aleph. Zok the Maril, to move a sand clock is muktzah, because it's a klisha malachti le'issa. It measures time. Zok the Maril, and I quote the Lashon, Afal gavdel mitzvah shari medida. Are you allowed to measure time for a mitzvah? And here you want to measure the time to know when Seder is over, or when Seder starts. Man leima dehachash medida shal mitzvah. What makes that a mitzvah? The im mishum the loimed al yada, you're learning with the sand timer. Im ken yitle muda im mishum issa v'ishari chalila. You can't do an issa b'maka mitzvah. So you can't use that sand clock even for learning. And the Torah, Beis Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, Magen Avram quote this lalach. Anaya medida tzumtish, measuring time. And the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, and the Magen Avram explains, even though you're using it to know what time it is for learning, it's not a makkah mitzvah. The question is, why not? So Pashid, if you learn a little extra, what's going to happen? It's not an aveira, it's a mitzvah. But the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Shin Ches Sif Pei Ches has a few key words. When you measure the mitzvah, that's mutter. The kazeisim, the mikvah. But then you're not measuring the mitzvah. You're measuring the time to know when to start or stop. You're measuring the time, not the learning. There's no heter for that. As I state in Rav. But one thing I will tell you, sand timer that this person asked me is a beferish mechaba, and all the Rishonim discuss it. So our case, Pashtus, is a beferish mechaba, and therefore it's a klisha malachta le'issa. Now, you say, but the game, if you say this, the game is Oynik Shabbos, Makkah Mitzvah, so I hope they're better Oynik Shabbos than games. Besides that, measuring food is also Oynik Shabbos, but has to be a real Makkah Mitzvah. So if you can't measure food for Oynik Shabbos, you can't measure time to play a game. But what's interesting, someone asked me, he asked me further, but even after I use this sand time, I have no idea how long it took. I don't know how long it is, I just know that the game's over. So I said, you're right, you're not measuring the time, you're measuring the game. But at the end of the day, this is why it's a problem with this sand time. If you want a limud zchus with this sand timer, let me tell you a davar nifla ma'od. Reb Shlomo Zalman and that Moirei Eish wants to know what's taka the heter that we use watches on Shabbos, Yom Tov. So he says the following, and he says, maybe we could even use this sand timer bisman hazeh. And listen to his cheshbon. He said, in the times of Chazal, the sand clock was used in business, in drugstores, and he shows why it was used in business. Therefore, measuring time was a business-related activity, and it was over the chayil. He says, but today, as Lashon is, Ein lecha adam she'ein lo, everybody has a watch. Everybody knows the time. So he says, oy bazoi, time, measuring time is no longer over the chayil. You know what it's like? Like a thermometer, like a blood pressure. When you see a sand timer, you don't think of business. So maybe that's included in his avana, that the kli medida of time is no longer business related. He says, yeah, you're right. The Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Maril spoke about a sand time that was used in those days in business. But today, a clock is not medida shel mekhamemcha of the chayim, therefore is mutter. That's what he says. Like this, I would understand today's sand timer maybe is also mutter. It's not used in business. But Lamaisa, I saw the Heintige Poiskim Taka say, the sand timer is a problem because you're measuring time. I also should add that our watches and clocks, even if you say it's Medida, there's no Issa having or wearing. Why? You said it all before Shabbos. It's like you set your chalent to cook on Shabbos. Of course it's making Medida, but you didn't do it. The Issa of the Maril was you're turning over the clock on Shabbos and you're measuring time on Shabbos. But one thing I think is true, if you're playing a game and you take your clock and you time how long this move takes, that's taka also even on Shabbos, even with a watch. But using a clock or a watch should not be a problem. Because this is the Medida that's done before Shabbos and it's going throughout the Shabbos. What I also want to mention is the last question, which really should be halavai we have time for the whole sugya, but it's a big sugya, and that is the use of what they installed more recently. They installed the water meters. Now the water meters are measuring the amount of water that a person uses. So it became a whole sugya if you're allowed to use water on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Medida on Shabbos or Yom Tov is also. So I must be clear that if it's more than mechanical, if it's electronic, has any type of electrical part of it, and when you take water, you put on that meter, so you're basically putting on an electric appliance on Shabbos or Yom Tov. And for that, you have to have a share for itself. Because by taking out water, the water runs through the meter and puts on the meter. So it's like putting on a refrigerator, putting on any other appliance. It's mamish loy nichole, but psikreish loy nichole is not mutter. So again, you have to know how each one works, but it's very possible if it's more than mechanical, you're doing a malacha b'shas ma'is. I'm talking about the old-fashioned mechanical one, that the water runs through it and it spins. So first of all, one saheta might be that there's no medida taking place right away. The water goes, and after a certain amount of water, then it starts to move. But Rabbi say, for us, I think it's Masuk Midvash. This mechanical water meter is a new example of misasek. The Gemara is misasek ba'alma. I am not interested in measuring the water. I want to take water. I would love to not pay this bill, but I have no choice. But I am taking water. I don't care. I'm not looking. I'm not measuring. So I think that's what Shmir Shabbos in Yud Beis Chaf means to say. This might be a medida of misasek. Misasek on Shabbos and Yom Tov is mutter. It's not a mais medida. Guten Tag to you all. Want to right now the Sikum? Let me just finish add quickly the Sikum. What we learned today, Bez Hashem. There's a big sugi. We learned 3 Mishnayos, but basically Uvda the Chayil is an Issa. The Issa of medida is either Uvda the Chayil or Mekach Umemka. But Mokem Mitzvah, it's not Uvda the Chayil. That's the Yisod. Not pshat that the mitzvah is mater. It's not Uvda the Chayil. Misasek is mutter because it's not Mimtzoy Cheftzach. It's not Uvda the Chayil. If it's not any type of medida is of course awesome. An interesting example we said of medida of misasik is the lachash, where you're not kavanah to measure. The sugi and bay is clear even on Yom Tov. Medida is aser, even to protect the meat from mice. Putting on scales is aser, even to mafish chal is aser. Measuring food on Shabbos or Yom Tov, even with your hands. Measuring feet, how many feet there is, unless it's Tchum Shabbos is also. Counting tiles to measure the distance on the floor, l'chayr is a problem. Weighing yourself is also medida. Standing back to back is not medida at all. Scoop, ladle, even teaspoons, if you're not medayik, it should be okay. A manual slicer to cut meat, cheese or bread is not medida, that's slicing. Cooking on Yom Tov, which needs the medida, otherwise you won't do it, is mutter b'mokoim oichel nefesh, and pashtus could be even on Shabbos also. That's only if you're makbet to always measure. A dvar mitzvah, refuah, medicine is mutter across the board. Weighing is machlokes if a mokem mitzvah weighing is mutter or not. Some say weighing is more chomer. Food in Yom Kippur should be weighed or measured before Shabbos, before Yom Kippur that is. Shiurim on Pesach, if it's needed, is okay. There's a svara to be made by a thermometer, by a blood pressure, that it would be considered a medida, because it's not businesslike, the nafkamina would be an outdoor thermometer, or if it's muktzah, using a thermometer on a roast is okay. Blood pressure, we said, is okay. Sand timer should not be used, and a watch on a water meter, there's a heter, because it's not the medida, that's us.
You should like to thank our shine is 6 to 8 feet away, and after shine, everybody should be looking it's so exciting to see how they eat all the faces. Can I know with Simcha and Abba? Rabbi Zev, the shiur is starting tomorrow, the daily shiur, also 1 o'clock. You have the schedule on the beam. Please, if anybody needs a mask, you can take a mask.